Hey folks, welcome to the Dark Horse Podcast, live stream number 252, if I am not mistaken.
Not prime, but highly palindromic.
Wow. Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that impressive at three numbers, but, still worth noting.
Perfectly so, though.
Yes.
Yeah.
Rather exact. I mean, palindrome kind of has to be perfect.
It does.
Yeah.
Yes.
Except for the spaces, which somehow don't count.
True.
A man, a plan, a canal, Panama.
Yeah.
Yeah. Spaces are all wrong.
Yeah, the spaces are all wrong. You are?
Oh, I'm Dr. Bret Weinstein. You are Dr. Heather Hying. We have not really confessions, I guess, to both of us. So we have confessions to offer today about the slight outbreak of unprofessionalness at the beginning of the last podcast.
Yes, and in fact, that's likely to be either all or most of what we're going to be talking about today is what we were involved in and the implications, even though there's obviously so much happening in the world that we could be focusing on, but because this is something very, very real at the moment, this is where we're going to be spending our time. We're going to do a Q&A immediately after our live stream, about 15 minutes after, on Locals. Please join us there. There's a watch party going on there now as well. We did a Q&A this last Sunday there that's still up. We talked about things like the election, the last election, 2020 election, lots of interesting stuff in that Q&A. So please consider joining us on Locals. As usual, we have three sponsors right up top at the.
Well, no, it's not going to go that way today. You'll see.
I will.
You'll see.
I'll see. Right at the top of the podcast, and that's it. We choose our sponsors carefully. All of them have products or services that we truly vouch for. So without further ado, our first sponsor is unlike any other service on the market. I know, because before they were a sponsor, I went looking for exactly what they provide. I desperately wanted our family out of the health insurance rat race. And I found it with Crowdhealth. Health insurance in the United States needs to be reimagined from the ground up. Between the astronomical prices, Byzantine paperwork, government interference, and focus on quick and easy pharma-based solutions that themselves often cause more problems than they solve, it's a mess. Enter Crowdhealth. It's not health insurance, it's better. A way to pay for healthcare through crowdfunding. Stop sending money to fear-mongering insurance companies who profit off you while barely covering your medical needs, and check out Crowdhealth. For years now, our family has had health insurance for emergencies only, an accident or a bad diagnosis. For a family of four, we are paying almost $2,000 a month for a policy with a $17,000 annual deductible to a company that never answered their phones and had a website that didn't work. Tens of thousands of dollars down the drain for no benefit whatsoever. I went looking for alternatives, and I found Crowdhealth. For $185 for an individual or $605 for families of four or more per month, you get access to a community of people who will help out in the event of an emergency. That's a third of what we were paying for bad health insurance. With Crowdhealth, you pay for little stuff out of pocket, but for any event that costs more than $500, a diagnosis that requires ongoing treatment, a pregnancy, or an accident, you pay the first $500 and they pay the rest. I didn't expect to know how well Crowdhealth would actually work for a while, but then Toby, our 18-year-old son, broke his foot in July, just a month and a half or so into us having Crowdhealth. We went to the ER, he got x-rays and the attention of several doctors and nurses, plus crutches and a walking boot. It wasn't cheap, as you might expect. Not only did Crowdhealth pay our bills, but everything about the interaction was easy. Their app is simple and straightforward. The real people who work at Crowdhealth are easy to reach, clear, and communicative. And with Crowdhealth, we are part of a community of people with aligned interests rather than the antagonism that is inherent to the insurance model. Turns out that Crowdhealth had approached us about being a sponsor a couple of years ago. I didn't get it then. It felt complicated to switch things up. I was wrong. Having rediscovered them on my own and benefited directly from what they are doing, I am now confident that Crowdhealth is the way to deal with medical expenses. It's way better than insurance. Join the Crowdhealth revolution. Get help with your healthcare needs today for just $99 per month for your first 3 months with code DARKHORSE at joincrowdhealth.com. One reminder, Crowdhealth is not insurance. It's better. Learn more at joincrowdhealth.com. That's joincrowdhealth.com. And use code DARKHORSE at checkout.
All right, you've coined two things in there.
Did I?
Grout health, which I'm not sure is an important concept, but it's a missing concept. We need that. And then you've also...
It's the health between the spaces.
Yes, or even just something to keep your grout clean, which, we could all use that, right? But the other thing is you coined the idea of ground up health insurance, which anybody who's dealt with health insurance, I think, would like to see it ground up. Am I right?
Maybe add it into an aioli. Aioli. Can't speak
Aioli,
again.
even just a little cheese, you know.
Cheese is good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. And if you won't eat it, it's probably good for pets.
Well, I'm sure they could put it into something.
Yeah.
People eat anything, apparently.
Oh, God. Yeah, we will get there. Maybe not this episode, but we will get there.
Well, we talked about seed oils an episode or two ago, and it's, this is one of the big conversations that's happening online. And boy, if seed oils aren't proof that that people, Americans in particular, will eat just about anything, I don't know what is.
Yeah, industrial lubricants for the win.
Okay, our second sponsor this week is Brain FM. Attention is one of our most precious attributes. Even the language that we use around it reveals some of the depth of relationship that we have with it. We can get someone's attention, give someone our attention, stand at attention, pay attention. There's so many ways to be engaged. And of course, there are nearly endless ways to be distracted. Nearly nobody can actually effectively multitask, and yet here we are in modernity, so often trying to do 2, 3, 7, 15 things at once. Our focus is broken in so many ways by the pantry and its contents, the messiness of the living room, the oiling of the lawnmower before it is put away for the season, the weeding, the grocery shopping, the laundry, the appointments to be made and kept, all of it. And we haven't even gotten to the notifications, texts, likes, shares, emails, new content. Do you want to pay attention, be truly at attention on a task that feels worthy and honorable and suited to your skills and aspirations? Brain FM might just help. Brain FM is an app that provides intense music designed specifically to boost productivity. Inspired by and based in scientific research beginning in the 1990s, the people behind Brain FM have created music that syncs brain patterns, helping you focus better, if that is what you want to do, or relax more deeply, or even sleep more easily. Brain FM's music demonstrably and quickly helps you find and stay in a state of flow. One of our listeners, who is also a friend, had an incredible experience with Brain FM, and after she wrote about it publicly, several of her readers wrote to say that they had had similarly spectacular results. Here is some of her testimonial. Quote, I signed up for Brain.fm before Heather finished reading the first endorsement. I have been addicted to distraction, which served as a means of managing a serious anxiety disorder for a very long time. Podcasts, audiobooks, streaming TV on the extra monitor, always keeping myself distracted and never fully present. But never being fully present is a miserable way to live, she says. Brain FM has fixed this problem. Not made it better, fixed it. I am able to do one thing at a time, and it keeps my brain in just the right place to facilitate being fully present with one task without letting my anxiety disorder cause distress. I got up this morning and deleted the Amazon Prime Video and YouTube Premium apps from my devices. I don't need them anymore, she writes. I am free. So, if you want to stop giving away your attention to the lowest bidder, consider Brain FM to help you focus, unitask, and get some shit done. Unlock your brain's full potential free for 30 days by going to brain.fm/darkhorse. That's brain.fm/darkhorse for 30 days free.
Friend and listener of the podcast. I think that should be reversed. Listener and friend of the podcast. I just, seems like the way to go.
She's our friend, though.
That's what I'm saying.
I don't know if she's a friend of the podcast.
Oh, okay. But still, first and foremost, friend, then listener. Never mind. Let the record reflect that I am shooting for at least a B- level ad read here. I will consider anything B- or above a stunning success.
Will you?
Yes. Our final sponsor this week is Timeline. Timeline makes MitoPure, which contains a powerful postbiotic that is hard to get from your diet. No, hard to get from your diet alone. Urolithin A, found primarily in pomegranates, which in Jamaica are known as pronga-nuts for some reason. Urolithin A has been the subject of hundreds of scientific and clinical studies, which suggest that it enhances mitochondrial function and cellular energy and improves muscle strength and endurance. But how does it work? Your mitochondria, not just yours, but everybody. You're very welcome. Your mitochondria are the powerhouses of your cells, but like everything living, they can decay or get damaged. The older we get, the more likely we are to have damaged mitochondria, which accumulate in joints and other tissues. This is in part because autophagy, the process by which damaged mitochondria are removed from cells, becomes less efficient the older we get, like every other process in the body. The age-related decline in mitophagy not only inhibits removal of damaged or excess mitochondria, but also impairs the creation of new mitochondria, which results in an overall decline in cell function. MitoPure from Timeline works by triggering mitophagy. To quote one recent research article, Singh et al. Published in Cell Reports Medicine in 2022, Targeting mitophagy to activate the recycling of faulty mitochondria during aging is a strategy to mitigate muscle decline. We present results from a randomized placebo-controlled trial in middle-aged adults, where we administer a postbiotic compound urolithin A mitopure, a known mitophagy activator, at 2 doses for 4 months. The data show significant improvements in muscle strength, about 12%, with intake of urolithin A. We observe clinically meaningful improvements in urolithin A on aerobic endurance and physical performance, but do not notice a significant improvement on peak power output. Take 2 soft gels of Mitopure a day for 2 months, and you can see significant improvements in your muscle strength and endurance. Mitopure enhances your cells' ability to clean themselves up and regenerate new healthy mitochondria. In combination with regular physical activity, Mitopure can help you stay strong and healthy into old age. Timeline is offering 10% off your first order of Mitopure. Go to timeline.com/darkhorse and use code darkhorse to get 10% off your order. That's timeline, timeline.com/darkhorse. Now,
You totally did it.
I would say that was a B- ad read, but if grading on a
I was going
curve,
to give you B+. Right at the cusp.
that's it.
And I don't, you want to go for extra credit, get solidly into B+ territory?
If we grade on a curve,
No curves, no.
No, this is a curve where I'm up against me. Like if you take the spectrum of my ad reads, that was a B+ ad read. So I'm good with that.
Curves are for losers.
Don't let the feminists hear you say that.
It's a different kind of curve.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I'm well aware, being a heterosexual male. Boy, do I know it.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of which, I doubt we're going to get to end up talking about the Olympus Spa today, but all nude women's spas of interest to heterosexual males, no doubt, right?
Yes.
Because, hey, naked women. But all you have to do is let the door open to men who are claiming to be women, and the entire thing falls apart.
Well, I see it as kind of a triumph for gender-affirming tyranny.
Yes, and depravity.
And, also depravity. Good.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
Yeah. Okay. So before we get to the main thing in the show today, we have 2 corrections right up top from last week. First, we were talking about the campaign finance stuff going on in the Harris campaign, and I said that I thought that the Call Her Daddy podcast set building, because Kamala did not want to fly across the country. She insisted on having a set built near to her. Cost $1 million, and we've heard that I think that may be off by an order of magnitude. I actually have not. I have not been able to chase down the for sure number regardless, but $100,000 still sounds excessive, but far more in keeping with what it should have cost to build a relatively simple set to exactly match an existing set across the country.
Yep. And I think that impacts my extrapolation from it, which was that vast sum, which we had thought it was, would imply a high degree of importance to keeping this all secret by navigating the very fine details of that set so it was undetectable, which, at $100,000, who knows why they did it. I still think that there was a home court advantage that they needed for some reason. We will probably never know. But, $100,000 is closer to what a set costs to build.
Yep. And then the second thing is we spent some time talking about seed oils last week, and we will do so again for sure. But we're specifically talking, one of the things we were talking about was olive oil. And I said, it's a fruit oil like avocado oil is. I said something. That is true, whether or not I said that exactly. And have since learned that the traditional processing of olive oil actually does tend to contain the pits, which are the seeds, because separating out the seeds from the fruits, which are the olives which people eat, would be a very time-consuming process. And so while, yes, olive oil is primarily effectively a fruit oil from olives. Traditionally, there were seeds in the processing part of in the processing part of the process, and so there would have been some extract from olive seeds as well in traditionally made olive oil. And I don't know if the more industrial making of olive oil now perhaps extracts the seeds first. It may well. I don't know.
Yeah, I think we did a good job talking about seed oils, and this brings into focus the question that I think you and I have now both addressed on Twitter, and we addressed a bunch in the podcast last week about the various reasons. Seed oil is a bad category. The fact that an oil comes from a seed isn't inherently an indictment of it. Coconut being a good example of a seed oil that's very good for you. But we talked about the fact that there was a second reason that some seeds might be just fine, and that would be a long history of cultivation. And certainly there's a very long history of cultivation of olives in the Mediterranean. And so the idea that humans and their fellow travelers, in this case olive trees, might have reduced the toxicity precisely because it was a benefit to both of them, that logic applies here very well.
It does. We mentioned, I think last week, and I mentioned on Twitter today, that, I don't yet know what it is about sesame seeds, for instance, that renders sesame seed oil not in this category inherently. Like, what is it about sesame seeds such that they are basically more willing to give up their oils through non-high-tech processing methods. And it's the high-tech processing methods of many of the seed oils, which require detergents and cleansers and solvents, and then dyes and such to render it something that seems
deodorants
barely palatable to humans. But of course, what we can fool with our senses, which is what the food makers, food in quotes, want to do, doesn't mean that our digestive system and the rest of our physiology is fooled. But then there is one other category of seeds, and we talked about this last week. Another way that seeds end up amenable to human eating without you having to worry really at all about the secondary compounds that the plants are putting into them is if the plants have protected their seeds by physical means rather than chemical means. So in general, because plants are sessile, so why isn't it toxic to eat meat? Because it's not, right? It isn't toxic to eat meat because, yes, it's true that no one wants to have their muscles eaten. But animals being mobile tend to defend themselves against attacks on themselves by fighting back or fleeing, right? So plants being sessile cannot tend to defend themselves by fleeing or by fighting back in a behavioral way. So they are left with typically either chemical or physical means with which to defend themselves. And usually it's chemical in the forms of toxins or hallucinogens or something else that is going to render the would-be herbivore resistant to, hesitant to eating the thing. But there are a few seeds like coconuts, which are giant ocean-going seeds, that don't appear to don't bother with anything chemical in their seed, because if you've ever tried to get into a coconut, it's really, really hard, right? And
there are a few creatures that can do it. The coconut crab, for example, is an amazing critter.
Absolutely amazing, and a well-trained human with a very sharp machete can do it. And I have been successful maybe once. Like it is tough, right? But basically, if you can defend yourself physically as a plant with a seed, and then if something like a coconut crab or a human with a machete is able to get in, then what is open to you is all of that deliciousness and nutritiousness without any of the chemical defenses that a plant without the physical defenses might have to put into it.
All right, I want to go back to the sesame thing, because as luck would have it, and I was not prepared to discuss this today, I would have done a deeper dive on it, but our good friend, Alexandros Marinos, actually decided to test my hypothesis on sesame seeds. Now, it's not really a test in the empirical sense.
What's the hypothesis?
The hypothesis is that the long history of cultivation of sesame seeds resulted in what was probably an inadvertent kind of selection, artificial selection by the cultures in question, where they would have chosen sesame seeds that were less bitter, and that would have reduced the toxicity over time and created a varietal that needs human cultivation, but
bitter being a standard sort of iconic indicator of this probably isn't good for you.
yeah, it's frankly, it's a pretty darn reliable indicator that there's a secondary compound. Now, some things like hops are bitter but not toxic, but in small quantities. So it is something you can develop a taste for. And in fact, anyway, story for another day. But what he did was he used AI to explore. The model that I laid out was, or the test that I laid out was, if you were to compare sesame to its closest living wild relatives, would you find a similar seed with similar contents that was, by comparison, much bitterer? And that is exactly what he found.
So I have basically no experience with AI. Mm-hmm. The immediate place where I'm skeptical of this approach with regard to AI is that you and I know, as people who have spent time over in phylogenetic systematic space, that what the AI will go to establish who the closest living extant relative is, may well be from some random maximum likelihood model based paper that doesn't actually establish the right sister taxon. So you in order to do that test, you need to have the actual closest. Well, you don't necessarily have to have the closest living relative, but you have to have a close living relative.
Let's put it this way: the closer in both evolutionary distance and actual proximity on the tree that you are, the better a test it is. Yes. But actually, the test just kind of degrades the farther away it is. Yeah. So anyway,
well, and the prediction, the prediction is both. It is a very good prediction of why sesame seeds should be more amenable to this, but also it is a prediction that in other domains is well known to be true, right? Like we know that we have increasing nutrient until the last 100 years or so in certain agricultural plants that have endured selective pressure from humans.
Yep. Now, I would also point out that you might imagine, if you were early in this kind of thinking, you might imagine, well, modern humans will surely do the same thing for the plants that we are selecting. Right. And that's not true. And the reason that it's not true is because there's no process of selection. You can imagine an ancestor. I mean, when I used to collect abandoned mangoes from abandoned trees in the Canal Zone, which were plentiful in Panama when I was doing my graduate work there. There were all these trees that had been at one time cultivated, and people were no longer in the Canal Zone. They'd been excluded, and so there were all these free mangoes. And the trees varied, within a tree. That tree puts out watery mangoes, not worth your time. That other one puts out really delicious ones, that kind of thing. So that selection is something that people become very attuned to. If you've got a plant that's putting out bitter sesame seeds and some other plant that isn't, you will tend, without thinking about selection, just to say, actually, I prefer that one, and sure, I'm going to plant its seeds. But that doesn't happen with the modern cultivars. For one thing, you're taking huge amounts of this stuff and grinding it all up and then doing this extraction process. You have no idea where the ones that are less bitter are. And so then you're using this industrial process to remove the off flavors, and that's no good. So there's no feedback for that kind of improvement. I would also point out that the need for that you're effectively entering into a system in which the plant is freed of its internal feedbacks, its internal trade-offs too, because you're putting all of these.
I was going to make, right? That a cultivar so freed from its secondary compounds, which were there to prevent herbivory or predation, depending on which word you want to use, is predicted not to do very well in the wild, right?
Yeah.
Because, right. So you have, if you were wandering around the canal zone in places that had once cultivated but now abandoned mango trees. The mango trees that were the most delicious to you as a human, presumably. And actually, this very first hypothesis I had that I tried to test in graduate school was that in places where there are cultivars that humans have chosen of fruit trees and wild trees, the wild primates will prefer the human cultivars.
Yep.
Right? A hypothesis generated by watching crowned lemurs eat tamarind in Madagascar, which is introduced from India. And although I was never able to test that because I couldn't find the monkeys in the particular place where I was working in Central America, you would exactly expect those mangoes, maybe not the ones that are watery, but the ones that have a bitter note or something, or cause your lips to go numb, have more of whatever that compound is.
I've forgotten.
Yeah, to do better in the wild when competing against, when protecting themselves against predation.
And in tropical habitats, of course, at least with respect to trees, there's not a single example of a mature mainland forest being invaded by any novel tree. At least that was true when I was doing my research a couple decades ago.
Yeah.
So that includes human cultivars,
Yep.
which are just absolutely inferior competitors without their human companions.
Yeah.
And indeed, all of the mango trees were fringe trees. These were all trees at the edge of a forest where something had been cleared, and yes, the forest was overtaking them. And my guess is those trees are less plentiful now than they were,
Yeah.
because the forest does recapture all that resource.
So further potential prediction of the hypothesis about sesame is that presumably sesame seed oil is being produced en masse at this point and in monocropped farms, which, as you say, reduce the selective pressure to almost zero. But the prediction would be that it has gone through a bottleneck of human selection before that the sesame seeds in the farms themselves have as a ancestor something that had been selected fairly precisely by humans.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. What happened last live stream? Do we want Jen to show just a clip of it or not?
I mean, I think it's worth it for anybody who did not see me coming apart at the seams.
Yes, it was our first. It was the first ad read, and this is some of what happened. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of the show, we have 3 sponsors right up top.
Those traditions would be different if you were gone.
So on a later episode, we may explain what explains what. Let's see, we can't even speak. We may explain what is going on here today, but we're not going to say anything now about what exactly explains this ridiculous level of unprofessionalism. No, we are not.
We should assure people it has nothing to do with drugs. It really doesn't.
Like the opposite. Actually, practically the opposite.
Sarah, life insurance. Yeah. King, that's Heather. That's Heather was now
It's not usually how reading works.
No, I mean, I just feel the need that we're truthful people. That's why people listen to us, and so I'm trying to maintain that through this ad read.
We have a lot of fun together.
Yes, we do have a lot of fun together.
And it was kind of a brutal week, but we had a lot of fun together, even though it was kind of a brutal week.
Oh yeah, we will come back to that. I think that's in some ways the most important punchline of the whole episode. I will say that there was one clue that people might have detected on our set that might have, for somebody who was thinking broadly enough, might have indicated what the hell happened to us.
Yeah, I saw you invited guesses on Twitter.
Yes.
Did you get any?
It wasn't much time. But we will go back and look and see if anybody guessed it ahead of our telling you.
Yeah.
So let me start just by putting this in. You're looking at me askance.
Go for it, man.
Okay. So, first of all,
we had fun, but we're not having fun anymore.
Fun is over. Reading, because I am a dyslexic, or whatever the actual case may be for those of us who are diagnosed as dyslexics, reading is not as native to me as it is to most similarly educated folk. In fact, I suspect that if my brain ever goes, if I live long enough for my brain to go, speaking will remain more or less native, and reading will be among the first things that become too difficult to be worth it.
It's true. There are some ways in which we could just not be more opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, reading's tough at best. It always kind of feels like a high wire act. Out loud, at least. I don't have any problem reading to myself, but reading out loud.
So you say. No one's checking.
No, I'm checking. In fact, well, here's the weird part. For those of you who want to understand what it's like to be of the other species, and some of you will be of the species, reading for me is something where, as I read, I have to, in my head, hear what it is that's on the page, or it's nothing. It's just scratchings. So anyway.
Like so many chickens.
Yeah, like so many chickens have walked across the page after dipping their talons in the ink. But anyway, so somehow, not in full possession of my faculties as I was reading, it kind of got away from me. And the problem is, the thing that you might have detected on the set was the thing that cures the giggles when that happens, which is not always about. Well, actually, I think there may be something to the idea that in general, it's not a perfect cure, but what works better than almost anything else is drinking, especially water. And I suspect that what that is that the giggles, let's imagine you were swimming and you couldn't touch the bottom and you got the giggles. That's dangerous, right? You wouldn't want to drown of the giggles, right? So the sudden introduction of water into the environment causes the body to kind of sober up. And I didn't have water on the table. You didn't have water on the table. And if there had been water on the table, I couldn't have reached for it. So
yeah, maybe before, and I'll just keep on leaving people hanging here. You know how if you don't drink for 3 days, you die?
Yes.
Like everyone's heard this.
Yeah.
This is one of the things like everyone's heard, right? Like you don't drink any water for 3 days.
That's one of the things the experts are right about.
Yeah, totally is. Well, at the point that we did our podcast last week, we were a little more than halfway through a 7-day dry fast. A dry fast being a fast where you ingest nothing, no food, no water, no nothing. And this was an extended fast. This was 7 days, which means we were a little over 3.5 days into dry fast, not eating nor drinking anything since Saturday evening. And you may have noticed we weren't, nor are we yet, dead.
You also notice that the place that I first tripped up in that ad read had to do with the concept of whether or not things would be different if you were dead.
I failed to notice that.
Well, there you go. See, another clue.
Maybe you thought maybe I'm dreaming, maybe I'm ascending to heaven
exactly.
I don't believe in, maybe
exactly
right.
A good place.
Okay, or not.
Yeah. Oh God.
Yeah.
Terrifying.
So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about this, and we'll come back to this also later. But one of the punchlines here is, guess what? The experts were wrong about that too. So many of the things that you thought you knew and that you just accepted, and this one just accepted, like, yeah, 3 days, you'll probably die, right? We're told this in elementary school, high school, like, it's just like, and every single person, it hasn't been a lot, but every single person that we've said anything about this to, the idea of dry fasting for an extended period of time, their first reaction almost to a person has been, what? Like, what are you talking about? Right? And indeed, maybe you want to share how, back in September, I came back from a trip and you started talking about dry fasting.
Yes.
And
so let me just say, first of all, I think because there's some, first of all, we are not experts in this. We're new to this, and we want people to be very careful to take what we say with a grain of salt. We're going to be straightforward. We're biologists. I think you will know that we did what we said we did. We're going to be completely clear about what we did and didn't do. But we also need to be careful about terms. And I'm concerned that the term fast is a little misleading because, frankly, the longer it went, the slower it seemed.
I see.
What
I thought you were going was, we just want to say, We're not doctors, as you know. We're not medical doctors. We're not providing medical advice. We're not advising anyone to try this. We do think it is fascinating and interesting, and is one of many, as it turns out, probably forgotten things that humans have done for a very long time, about which we are now told you certainly couldn't do that because, of course, you will die.
Not only done it for a long time, but if you were to go back through your entire history of ancestors, you would find that this had been imposed on them by nature without intention many, many, many times.
Precisely.
And therefore, what you would expect is an elegant pattern that the body, faced with austerity on both the food and water front, would have an elegant pattern for dealing with it. That is to say, it might be a bad thing, but that the body would deal with it in the most elegant way possible. And the reason being that ancestors who faced that kind of austerity and dealt with it elegantly would have outcompeted those who dealt with it less elegantly. So you would expect an evolved pattern in which the body addresses the lack of food and water very, very well. And it is interesting that we moderns know so little about it, especially, I know that you will get there, but in light of all of the traditions that include something of this in the course of the various annual cycles.
Yeah. And so we can, we now think, because this is the first 7 day that we've done, but we now think that this is potentially a tool with which the vast number of Americans, will keep it to for the moment, who have been harmed by big ag, big food, big pharma, can potentially triage their way back to health. And by which people who are not yet harmed, or who have gotten themselves back to a healthy place, can use this as an occasional way to basically snap your body back into metabolic health. The indicators, and I'm jumping ahead here before we go into our particular story, but indicators of diabetes and prediabetes, cancer and precancer, dementia and Alzheimer's, and the precursors of those, metabolic syndrome, metabolic diseases, all of these things, even with just intermittent dry fasting, because there is basically no research on no published scientific research that I have found on how extended dry fasting can affect the body. But with regard to intermittent dry fasting, all of those indicators of disease and actual disease go down. So this is potentially a health intervention, and what we did wasn't intermittent dry fasting; it was an extended dry fast. But there are advantages even at the intermittent dry fasting level, and of course that is what you were doing when you were sleeping. So for all of the things that people have heard about the advantages of sleep, about the need for sleep in order to be healthy, certainly part of what the benefit is there is that you're giving everything in your digestive system a break. So yes, there are neurological changes that happen while you sleep, and there are different stages of sleep, and all of those things, many of those things that you've heard are probably true. But it is also true that anyone who actually sleeps through the night and isn't waking up all the time and getting little sips of water is effectively intermittently dry fasting every night, and that is where some of the healing comes from, reductions in inflammation and indicators of metabolic syndrome and all of the rest of these things.
All right. So I think going back to narrative is a good idea. Yeah. So you were away. I'm terrible at keeping track of when things were. When was that?
Early September.
Early September. You were away for a number of days, and I was doing some fasting, which I've actually started doing a lot of experimenting. I do a lot of intermittent fasting, not eating till 5 o'clock, and a certain amount of extended fasting, like a few days.
Actually, if we're going to, let's just go back. I actually started this year with a resolution. I thought, I'm still suffering from all of these effects of this boat accident, which is now, almost at that point 7 years ago, and I'm just going to do a 36-hour fast once a week for the first 2 months of the year, right? 9 weeks. And it wasn't a dry fast. I never heard of a dry fast at that point. And I did it, and it was fine. And it felt like, didn't really make any difference. Whatever. Like, I don't need to keep doing that. It wasn't that hard, but I wanted food, but I didn't feel like achingly hungry, because the fact is most of us in the United States, in the weird world, are so overfed that it takes longer than that to actually feel real hunger. You start wanting food soon, like pretty quickly. But are you actually in need of nourishment within 36 hours? No, you're not.
So I will say I've had particularly good luck with intermittent fasting. You have a hypothesis, which I think is probably right, but certainly I would love to see tested, that this actually there may be a male-female difference based on the division of labor between male and female hunter-gatherers and all of that.
And within female lifespans, a difference for, fertile, pregnant, breastfeeding, and postmenopausal women as well, specifically.
But all right, you were away. I was experimenting with some longer fasting, and I can't remember exactly. I think I was probably looking up something about what's called acidosis crisis, and I was doing a kind of a search, and it led me somewhere. And I've had this happen to me on a number of different topics over my lifetime. Some term shows up that suggests there's an iceberg I don't know about, and I've just seen the tip of it, and it's like, well, now I've got to know what that is. So I saw the term dry fasting show up in my search. And I was like, what the hell is that? Right? So I started to do a deep dive. And at first, of course, I carried the same suppositions that most people have about the fact that the maximum length of time you could survive without water, or maybe it's more sophisticated than that. Maybe it's an LD 50% of people die at 3 days, blah, blah, blah. But the more I dug, not only did I find out that couldn't possibly be the case based on the number of people who were apparently doing this and the total lack of any evidence that people were dying from this, but I also got a story that fit with. So remember, back in my training, I'm a mammologist. I spent time studying mammals. And so I'm reading with a critical eye what is being described here. It doesn't all fit. I think some of what's being said isn't quite right, but a lot of it fits extremely well with things I know. And there's one fact that lands like a ton of bricks. The fact is, the way that a camel's hump functions. A camel's hump is indeed the mechanism, or one of the mechanisms, by which this remarkable dry adapted animal deals with extended periods where there's no water to be had. The air is not full of water. There's no water to be drunk. It's not getting it from the food because nothing grows in these places.
So before you go on, I want to ask the audience to consider what you think is going on inside the camel's hump. Like, do you imagine it as like a barrel full of water that just kind of sloshing around? Probably if you now are asked to consider that question, you're like, no, because that would make it unstable, and like that's probably not what's going on. So, in which case, how is the water being stored in the camel's hump?
And I will confess that I actually learned this fact in the graduate study of mammalogy. I hadn't thought terribly much about it, but if you had asked me as I entered graduate school how a camel's hump functioned, I probably would have told you there's liquid water in there. And that is not the case. So what it turns out, the important fact is that a camel's hump is in fact full of fat, and a sort of complicated systems understanding will tell you that a hump full of fat is actually the opposite of a hump full of water. And this is not true for the following reason. There are things in the universe which are conserved, and there are things in the universe which are not. Water is decidedly in that second category. Water, if you said water is neither created nor destroyed, you'd be dead wrong. Water is both created and destroyed on the regular during biological processes. One of the processes that makes water is the breakdown of fat. So how does a camel's hump work? It works by storing fat, which is then broken down metabolically, releasing large amounts of water.
So you've totally jumped ahead in the story here. I happen to have exactly the relevant visual here if you want to show my screen. This is from a 1981 paper by a guy named John Candlish in the biochem department at the University of Singapore called Metabolic Water in the Camel's Hump, a textbook survey, in which he is looking at 4 what he calls storage substrates, glycogen, which is, of course, the storage unit for glucose or carbs, fat, protein, and ethanol, alcohol, right? So we've got the 4 basic macros. And across the top, we have water yields. And interestingly, ethanol yields a high amount, the highest amount of water, because and that sort of makes sense, right? It is a liquid already. But compared to glycogen, a carb, and protein, fat produces so much more water upon being broken down than either of those 2 other standard macromolecules, that if you stress your body for water, it's going to go after the fat preferentially. And this, again, this is one of this, I was hoping to wait for this until later on, but whereas during water fasting, people tend to lose lean body mass because muscle gets broken down, because your body is starved for nutrition, but not for water, it's going to go after protein. Whereas during a dry fast, when your body is starved for both nutrient and water, but water is the more pressing issue, it's going to break down fat preferentially. And so you do not tend to lose lean muscle mass during a dry fast, whereas you do during a so-called water fast.
All right, a couple points here. One, by the way, love that chart.
Yeah, I thought you would.
That chart is actually cognitively way too conservative, because the reason that animals prefer to store energy, and I'm not talking about water yet, the reason that animals prefer to store energy as fat is that it is so energy dense per unit of mass. So the point is, the cost for carrying around fat is low because fat is light. That's why it floats on water, right? Mm-hmm. So the point is, the fact that that number for the amount of fat released per gram is so high for fat is misleading, because you've also got a per volume consideration, which would be even more impressive. Mm-hmm. So there's a huge amount of water to be released chemically from fat when fat is broken down. Second point I wanted to make is that there are actually multiple reasons for the body to prefer fat as a way of creating water by chemically releasing it. One of them would be, for example, let's say in comparison to protein, that the release of water from protein will create toxic ammonia compounds. So there's a fact in nutrition, which I believe is a robust fact, which is that the body is somewhat reluctant to break down protein for calories or other reasons because of the toxicity that then has to be addressed by things like your liver. And then, okay, go ahead.
Whereas what you release when you break down fat is whatever toxins have been inadvertently stored in your fat, which you would like to release and have them flushed out of your system anyway.
Yeah, these are fat-soluble compounds, which are hard to get rid of because they're locked up in the adipose tissue.
In your fat cells, and it seems to be, and I want to say this with a caveat because I have not been able to vet this for sure, but I have seen the claim in a number of places without the research to back it up, that and everything we've said so far would seem to support this claim, which is that another thing that you've heard and no doubt have believed, as I did, is once you have a fat cell, you've got that cell for life, and it can expand and it can shrink, but you've got that cell for life. And so if you've been fat, it's going to be harder to stay thin once you get there, because those fat cells are just waiting to fill up. But if you need to lyse the fat cell to get to the water, and you stress your body for water, then those fat cells actually get lysed and are gone. L-Y-S-E, lysed.
Yep. All right. Last point I want to make at this stage is another reason that the body, given the predicament that you put it in with dry fasting, should prefer fat over protein to break down, is very intuitive, actually. Let's imagine for a second that we're talking about a very closely related creature to us, like a cheetah. Okay, and you realize that doesn't sound very closely related, but it's a mammal, right? And it's...
You said cheetah, not Cheeto.
No, not a Cheeto. No.
Not very closely related.
No. A cheetah, which has to successfully hunt very regularly because it's an endotherm, a warm-blooded creature. It burns a huge amount of calories just to stay at the right temperature. And it has to stay at the right temperature because if the temperature falls, all of its enzymes fail to work very well. Us endotherms require a tight temperature regulation. Now imagine the cheetah is somehow living through a drought and faced with a lack of animals because in a drought there may not be enough animals, prey items to eat, and it doesn't have access to water because the water hole is dried up or something like that. What should happen inside that cheetah? Well, you've got some fat to break down, which has a very high energy density, and you've got some protein to break down, which also has a high energy density, and a certain amount of water in it. But if the animal has to successfully hunt and it's having trouble doing it, by breaking down protein, it gets less and less likely to succeed because it gets weaker and therefore slower. Whereas on the other hand, if you break down fat, the animal gets lighter, releases more water, and therefore a lighter cheetah is able to make a successful hunt more easily because it has less mass that it has to accelerate. Well, either whether it's linear acceleration or it's cornering, trying to catch the wildebeest, it will accelerate more efficiently the less it weighs across the board. So the body has reasons to prefer burning fat. And the fact that there's a tremendous amount of water there means that one can trigger whatever pathways it is that we have all inherited from our ancestors, be they human or pre-human. We can trigger those pathways by denying it water. Whether that's safe to do, well, you and I have gone a certain amount down this road and we can say a certain amount about it. Is there room for a whole lot more research? You better believe it, but you would want it done by people who didn't have a conflict of interest. And, I'm sure you're headed there. But I will say that as much as there's a lack of research in the places that you would want it if you believed in our Western scientific system, there has been a lot of exploration, especially Russians, for example, who have looked into the question of, well, what happens when you deny the body both food and water for extended periods of time?
Yeah. So let's just go back first to, I came back, you had looked into this, and you had done some weird thing, which I don't know if you want me to describe, but it included a day, 24 hours of dry fast.
Yep.
And I had this reaction that I think everyone does. What? Like, okay, a day, I guess you can survive, but aren't you begging for trouble there? You shortly thereafter left on your own adventure, and I did a 3-day fast all alone on my own, a 3-day dry fast, which I preceded with 24 hours of liquids only and followed with 24 hours of liquids only. And we're not going to end up getting into all of the details here today, but the reason that I decided to precede with 24 hours of liquids only is because you want as much as possible to have your bowels empty when you begin such a thing. And the refeeding process after a dry fast is extraordinarily important so that you don't basically undo the health benefits that you have accrued through the dry fast. So that is a giant topic on its own, which we probably won't get into much today, but you can't just decide, oh, okay, I'll just stop eating and drinking now. You want to have been eating very clean for a while. In my case, I had already for a couple of weeks said, you know what, I'm off alcohol, sugar, and gluten. Just like, let's see what happens. And if you're on any meds that you really feel like you need to be taking every day, you're not you're not ready for a dry fast because you can't take stuff in during a dry fast. That's part of the point. There are also distinctions to be made between what are called hard dry fasts and soft dry fasts. A hard dry fast, you have no exposure to water whatsoever. A soft dry fast, you're allowed to shower and brush your teeth so long as you don't swallow any water. I think there's actually an intermediate thing for which there isn't a name, which is something we'll talk about here, but in which not only are you allowed exposure to water, but you should be encouraged to do things like go outside in the cold and just embrace the cold wet. And it sounds like the last thing in the world you would want, but we both found that it was something that we actually totally craved. Like by day 7, we were looking forward to the cold plunge. On day 6, we went out on the water or we dove into the Sailor Sea. And that sounds crazy, but it was exactly the right thing.
Yep.
Yep.
All right. So I want to just go back and pick up how we got here.
Yeah.
So you were away. I was experimenting with fasting. I run into this thing and it starts making a lot of sense because, of course, it fits with what I understand about camels and the way.
Kangaroo rats.
Okay. I didn't know about that, but now that you
They
mentioned
don't have
it,
humps, but
no, but it makes perfect sense.
But they
Desert
do
creature.
dry fast effectively. And hold on before you go on. So the word for water that the body generates internally is metabolic water, and so camels generate metabolic water through basically liquidating their humps by taking the fat out of them, and kangaroo rats do a certain amount of recirculating of conserving of water. I think do they run their urine through the loop of Henle twice or something? I don't remember.
Yeah, I think that's
something
right.
like that, right? The urine that they actually excrete is super
Or
concentrated,
they
but
have
they
very
also
long loops of Henle, something
maybe that's
like
it.
that.
Yeah, loop of Henle being another mammal synapomorphia, a shared derived characteristic that is unique to mammals, which suggests that our first mammal ancestors were indeed already exploring habitats that were risky for us, right? Because what that loop of Henle in the kidney does is concentrates urine and helps us preserve water. So kangaroo rats do it in a different way than camels.
So the thing that really struck me was I've been, of course, there every step of the way as you've been struggling to recover from the boat accident. And what I was reading in doing my first initial deep dive on the dry fast was the number of cases of chronic injury and damage that people had successfully addressed with this technique. And superficially speaking, I thought the explanation made a kind of sense. There's still some things about it I don't know. It may be more metaphorical than we understand, but the idea that a body that has damaged tissue and is forced to cannibalize itself will preferentially go after tissues that are paying back least, which would tend to be damaged tissues. So the autophagy process is, should be, if it's an elegant process that you face because selection has given you an elegant process, it should go after the things that work least well first, including mitochondria, broken cells, scar tissue, that sort of thing.
So the analysis, again, unverified by research that I have yet found, is that the three sources of metabolic water that the body will go to first when water stressed, as through an extended dry fast, will be autophagy of things like diseased and old cells, such as mitochondria that are worn out, etc. Pathogens, and basically that as you what's the liquid version of starve? As you
Desiccate.
as you desiccate pathogens that you have, and I'm sure you have some, right? Like, and some of us probably have a higher parasite or pathogen load than we know. As those things get desiccated, they become weak, and the body will go after those and tear them apart, use the parts that it can, and flush the rest. And then fat being the third one. So the autophagy increases during extended dry fast, and then also at, I think it's day 3, we know under some circumstances, because the research has actually been done, but don't know across all circumstances, although why not, you actually get proliferation of stem cells. So new generation of stem cells during extended dry fast that aren't otherwise necessarily inclined to be prompted to generate.
Okay, so in reading about this stuff, I thought I would love to do that, but I also, more importantly, thought Heather has been struggling with all of this damage that's very hard to address. It requires, the equivalent of physical therapy regularly in order to deal with these things. And this is certainly worth a shot to see whether it has any impact whatsoever on these now effectively permanent chronic conditions. And so anyway, you came home and I said, I read about this thing. I know it sounds crazy, but I think you need to read about it too, and you'll see why I'm focused on it. And that led you to your, I had only done one day at that point, which was just dipping your toe in the water.
And at that point, I thought, I actually want to do this alone. I want, I'll keep in touch with you, but I want to do this entirely alone, clear my schedule so that if I'm like just laid out flat on the floor during this thing, unable to function particularly, it's okay. I'm not getting in anyone's way and no one is depending on me. And did a 3-day fast in near the end of September, 3-day dry fast, and then flew out to DC for the Rally of the Republic, Rescue the Republic rally. And at that point, it was too early to know if the results were going to be permanent, and perhaps it still is. But for the first time since 2016, when I almost died in that boat accident in Galapagos, I didn't have chronic pain. And it hasn't come back.
And I will just say, in passing, you looked dynamite when you showed up in DC. So it was, not just a question of internal stuff. There was one other thing I wanted to add here, just for the full context. My 1-day dry fast was really mostly a test of the following question. I have several times in my life, I could count them on one hand, screwed up and not had enough water with me in some circumstance where I'm breathing out a ton of water, right? Some place where I'm hiking, it's hot, I don't have enough water. And my experience in those cases was that profound thirst is one of the worst things I have ever experienced. It is, I think, the surest route to madness, and rapidly so. Much, much worse than starvation. I'd much rather feel physical pain. Presumably there are levels at which it would overtake thirst, but profound thirst is absolutely awful. And so my assumption going into this, based on what we all think we know, is that you would become profoundly thirsty in 24 hours and it would get worse and worse and worse. And the 1-day dry fast that I did should have told me whether or not this was something that was even possible for me. Maybe I'm more sensitive to thirst than most people, but after 24 hours, I should have a pretty good idea whether or not this is just going to be unbearable. And after 24 hours, ordinarily I would have taken a drink, but I didn't feel profoundly thirsty. So my sense is there's some combination about, one of my awful experiences with thirst was in Jamaica, where I had hiked down with some kids who were in the neighborhood who wanted to go down this cliff and go look at the tide pools. And it was thousands of feet down. And anyway, on the way back, I was just mad with thirst enough that we encountered this disgusting little puddle of water in a rock full of gross algae, and I actually considered whether or not to drink it. I didn't, but anyway, so I was testing that hypothesis, and my sense is those circumstances are one where you're putting out so much water that the process that is involved in dry fasting doesn't kick in. And so that is actually that discomfort is about a kind of danger you're putting yourself in that is not just a simple matter of not taking in water. It's a combination of not taking in water and having a sort of uncontrolled loss of water to the environment at the same time. And your body is putting you on high alert. This is really bad.
Yeah. This is dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, that didn't accompany this. And so it was like, there's probably something down this road that I just don't know. And I got interested in it, and then you explored it. And obviously 3 days isn't excruciating either. So
it was hard.
Difficult.
But maybe one of the, one of the benefits that we haven't talked about yet at all is the psychological benefit of putting yourself to a test and succeeding. And saying, okay, I can I face temptation? Do I have the willpower to do this? And I think you need to be in a state of health such that you are confident, and or be monitored by someone whom you trust, a medical professional whom is actually competent, whom you trust, such that you don't worry that every little twinge or something is an indication that this, the end is nigh. But on my first 3-day dry fast, on the final day, so in all 3 of the cases that we've done, in all 3 of the extended dry fasts that I've done, and you did the second 2 as well, we started them around 6 or 7 p.m. So that such that on any given day, you are coming up to a next day marker. And so on the final day of my first dry fast, I went into town and went into the place that makes the best chocolate chip cookies that you may ever have had in the universe.
Where else would you have chocolate chip cookies if not in the universe?
But they're right here, and it has big chunks of sea salt on top, and they're warm and gooey, and my God, are they good. And I walked in, and it smells. They only make them 2 days a week or something, and they're fantastic. And I felt really good about wandering through the store with, it was still then, it was still high enough tourist season. There were a lot of people around. And everyone very excitedly talking about the cookies and all the other things at the store. And I thought, I'm cryptic. Like, I'm not talking to anyone about what it is that I'm doing. You get a little self-conscious because you have ketosis. I started referring to it as ketosis mouth. Like, okay, I don't really want to breathe on anyone. But being able to resist the temptation of something that is right before you and that is extraordinary. And in that case, it's like, well, in 6 hours, I get to go have the first nutrients I've had in 3 days, and still only liquid for a while, and then it's slow to refeed. But the cookies would come, and the longer you wait, the better the more lasting the benefits are. So, anyway, to jump forward a little bit, we came back from Rescue the Republic, and did a 3-day fast together, and a 3-day dry fast together again. Bracketed on either side with liquids only for 24 hours. And then we did this not that long, but rather remarkable trip through, Florida and Pittsburgh and Montana. And sometime during that trip, I had said to you, okay, I think I want to do a 3-day dry fast once each in September, October, November, and see if I can, really kick some stuff loose. And in reading a bit more, I said, yeah, I want to do a 7-day. Let's do it. So we came back from this most recent trip, and within a couple days, did this 7-day. So that's some of the background, and we are going to show you actually some of the images that we sent to each other during the 7-day dry fast. But first, let's talk a little bit about some of the religious traditions that do intermittent dry fasting. Okay, so we have, and these will be familiar to probably most of you, at least the first one, Ramadan, which is the 9th month of the Islamic calendar, is 1 month of consecutive days every year. It's a lunar calendar, so it moves around. It moves like 13 days earlier in our calendar every year, so it's at wildly different times a year, depending on where in the Islamic larger calendar you are, of intermittent dry fasting between dawn and dusk. So people who are practicing Ramadan are encouraged to get up before dawn and eat, and then it's a dry fast through sunset, and then encouraged to eat after sunset. And of course, depending on when in the year and where you are on the planet, that could be not really that hard at all. If Ramadan is happening in, say, let me go, June in Alaska. If you are practicing or honoring,
that's a good point.
right? But if it's December in Alaska and you're Muslim and that's where you happen to be, and that's when Ramadan happens to be this year, it's gonna be a long slog between meals, and so that's actually very interesting. That the dawn dusk thing in all of these faiths, it's and probably there are more, but Islam, Judaism, and Baha'i faith all have some traditions of intermittent dry fasting, which is pretty fascinating. So Ramadan is a month of consecutive days. Baha'i faith is 19 consecutive days in March of every year, and then Judaism has 6 single days, including Yom Kippur, which is, again, just intermittent dry fast between sunrise and sunset. And then Islam, interestingly, also has some other prohibitions during the Ramadan fast, which is smoking and engaging in sexual and sinful activities.
So I will say, there's part of me that wonders whether or not the variation that comes from your latitude and the dawn dusk thing is a feature or a bug.
Well, and Baha'i specifies March, and March everywhere is equinox. So that's going to
Okay.
be relatively even, relatively equivalent no matter where on the planet you are.
Yep.
And then Judaism, those, Yom Kippur moves around a little bit, but it doesn't advance across the entire year. And so
Yep.
the very unusual one there is the Islamic
Islam.
tradition.
Yeah. Interesting. But you're right. It does radically change things.
Yeah, it really, really does. Okay, so, boy, there's a lot.
I mean, you have someplace next to go?
Were you trying to interrupt? Go on.
I wasn't.
Okay. There's a lot to say here. One is that, and I think we've said part of this already, which is that most of the research that, at least that I have found, has been done on people who have engaged in Ramadan fast. I don't find any research except that done by individual Russian research teams on extended dry fasting, and what the effects of Ramadan fasting seem to be, again, are to reduce indicators of things like metabolic disease and cancer and diabetes and Alzheimer's and just all of these things. So let's see, there were a number of, so this is a book that is flawed but useful, that we've gone to, and I'll put this into the show notes, of course. It's called the Phoenix Protocol, Dry Fasting for Rapid Healing and Radical Life Extension. I'm not buying the radical life extension part. It's by a guy named August Dunning, who's a former NASA Space Station ops system engineer, chemist, and physicist. And it's fascinating. And one of the things, one of the charts that he has in this book is, maybe not entirely true, but it's a fascinating list. So let me just show you. This is page 58 from this book. Conditions resolved with dry fasting. General recovery and rejuvenation of the body. Improves metabolism. Strengthens a person's faith in their abilities. Improves thought processes. Promotes spiritual development. Cleanses the skin, the digestive tract, the kidneys. Promotes the utilization of diseased cells. Dissolves stones in the kidneys and gallbladder. Cleans vessels of cholesterol plaques, reduces high blood pressure, stage 3 and 4 cancers, metastases, improves the function of the lymphatic system, stimulates the immune system, activates the processes of toxin removal, acute renal failure, thrombosis, major focal myocardial infarction, pronounced body mass deficit, manic depression, obsessive states, hereditary mental disorders, severe head trauma, severe concussion, only short courses, 1, 3, and 5 days, encephalitis, toxoplasmosis, inflammatory diseases of central nervous system, cerebral palsy, cerebral tumors, hypothyroidism and thyrotoxicosis, chronic diseases of the cardiovascular system, hepatitis, bronchial asthma, angina pectoris, diseases of the nervous system, epilepsy, schizophrenia, condition after chemotherapy and radiotherapy, acute infections of kidney, hemophilia, thrombophlebitis, grade 3 heart failure, diseases of the inner ear. Now that sounds like an absurd list, and maybe some of the things on there don't belong on there at all, but I'm certain that some of them do.
Quite. I do want to address the question, obviously the book claims benefits in radical life extension. I think actually the likelihood of that claim depends entirely on the definition of what that means, because what I learned, the lesson that came through again and again in my study of telomeres and their evolutionary nature, their relevance to cancer and senescence, meaning aging, is that radical life extension is, as far as we know, not possible if you are talking about beyond the maximum human lifespan. I'm not saying we will never reach 123 or 4, but I'm saying it's a fool's errand at this point to be pursuing that as an individual. However, radical life extension has already happened with respect to average lifespan and personal lifespan. These are things that you do have a lot of control over. So if radical means take control of your health, and instead of living to 75 or 80, living to 95, then I don't find that implausible at all. So anyway, I don't know yet what he means by it, but I wouldn't rule it out just because that term has become popular amongst people who think we're going to live to 1,000 years. Because, as you say, that book is a mixed bag. There's some stuff in it that's clearly not quite right. But
well, as we have, we don't know him. Maybe we will come to. Seems very smart, and an autodidact and a generalist, as we hope for from our scientists and engineers. But as someone who is primarily an engineer, or who approaches things from an engineering perspective, and according to the back of this book, here's a NASA space station ops system engineer, chemist, and physicist. What's missing there is biologist, and what I think I think the error is, once again, the conflation of complex with complicated systems.
Yep, I think that's right. That said, I've read a lot in there that's quite sensible. Yeah. So you have to sort of refactor some things, but anyway, it's a good resource in general, especially for describing things like the experience. There's some things in there that I want to chase down further. But anyway, yeah.
So when we came back from DC and did my second and our first together 3-day dry fast, you started sending me pictures of food. Well, and I had said to you at first, this isn't helpful, man. It's not helpful. But I joined in because, why wouldn't I?
Yeah.
And I have not actually pulled up those, but I did collect all of the images that we sent to each other during the 7-day dry fast that we just did, which again, this 7-day dry fast, which included, a day before of liquids only. And then we did do just water only as we broke the fast for 14 hours or something. And then just liquids and watermelon only for another 24 hours. And gradually last night we had steak. It was so good.
It was good.
So I think it will be telling to share the progression of images that we shared with each other.
Yeah, and I will just say it will sound a little mean that I sent you an image of what I think was a gourmet hamburger back in your 3-day dry fast, or our shared 3-day dry fast previously, but that at some level, okay, that was a little spousal joke for two people who were facing food austerity at the same moment. But it very quickly became clear that actually searching up these images was both a little bit painful because you can't have those things anytime soon, but also oddly pleasurable to think one appreciates the idea of these things at a level that you just don't even know is possible until you've spent that long a period not eating and drinking.
Yeah, I actually enjoyed spending time, like the one kind of shopping that I enjoy is food shopping for good food. And I actually enjoyed spending time at the grocery store in the middle of things. And looking at the thing, I'm like, okay, that's a jar of capers, and so it's shelf stable, and I'm going to bring that home. And I think the first we had eggs the first morning that we had solid food, and then we had cold smoked salmon with capers and red onions and a yogurt dill sauce that I made on cucumbers and avocado, and just the amount to which your other senses get heightened, and then when you are able to start eating again and drinking again, your taste is just through the roof. Everything tastes so good, and you need less flavor than you have.
One bite seems decadent. Yeah. It's amazing.
Okay, so you could show my screen here. I think there's 21 of these.
These are texts pictures that we found and sent to each other in the middle of this somewhat brutal dry fast.
Yes. I won't continue to identify who sent what to whom. But I believe that I started it off this time. I sent you this steak.
Yes, you did.
With, garlic and butter, salt and pepper, rosemary. You responded once again with a gourmet-looking hamburger.
Yeah, that's a brioche bun, I believe.
Okay. Yeah. That's a pretzel bun.
It was a brioche pretzel bun, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So we don't do this, but one of the things that we have understood from the research that we have found that extended dry fasting can do is possibly break dietary allergies. And so, and some of which are presumably at this point a result of vaccine injuries. And so if you can flush out some number of the things that are making you sick, and that you can tamp down the errant responses for your immune system, it is possible that you might be able to eat some of the things that have been plaguing you for a while that you wanted to eat but couldn't eat well. And so I bring that up because you sent me this picture of a clearly gluten-full bun, which you have not been able to eat any gluten for, well, probably for decades, but you have not been eating any gluten, having discovered this for well over a decade at this point.
Yep. I want to take this opportunity to say one other thing that I think we've neglected, which is if you think about the puzzle of what happens if your alimentary canal, especially your gut, is damaged. What is the process of healing, and how much is the process of healing actually impeded by the fact that your gut is functioning? In other words, if you had an airplane, right, you can do a lot of maintenance on an airplane when it's on the ground in the hangar that you can't do in flight. There's some things you can do in flight, but the point is your gut, if you don't have any such, and this is even an argument for why you have these intermittent or somewhat extended fasts in many of these traditions. It may be that there's a kind of healing that is regularly necessary that you just simply can't access with nightly sleep. You have to shut your gut down for a longer period of time. And one of these things that I think, can be certain is true. A lot of this is speculative, but one of the things you can be certain is true based on the way your gut comes back online when you do start the refeeding process, is that you have effectively shut the whole thing down in a way that is not part of a modern life.
Right.
And that shutdown process presumably allows a kind of repair that in many of us is probably highly necessary, but never happens because of the number of toxins in our diet, just the simple fact of having to process food constantly. And so anyway, I think that's a potentially very important source of some of the benefits that do seem to come from dry fasting.
Yeah. Okay, so the images that Bret and I sent to each other during this 7-day dry fast began with a steak, moved from there to a gourmet hamburger, to a flourless chocolate torte with a bit of perhaps whipped cream or creme fraiche, fresh raspberries, a charcuterie board with grilled olives and meats and radishes and peppers and cheese cubes and some, oh my goodness, that looks so good. And maybe even almonds or chocolate covered almonds, deliciousness. Fresh strawberries, fantastic. Peaches and cream, the peaches having been, looks like glazed, perhaps lightly grilled or something. A chicken breast. Chicken breast is not usually the most interesting kind of chicken, but this chicken breast looks particularly nicely done with some, again, garlic and pepper and maybe parsley on it and a nice sauce. Apple cider donuts. Oh, my pictures got smaller. This is maybe my favorite of all. And just for me, I sent this to you, Googling steak salad, and my God. Steak and cherry tomatoes and raw red onion and avocado and corn and some kind of a green sauce and some like cotija or goat cheese all over the top. Amazing. This is probably by, day 3 or 4, maybe day 3. Coffee ice cream with like shavings of chocolate on top that are the right kind of chocolate, not the chocolate that gets like solid in your mouth when you're eating ice cream and then you're wondering why you have the chocolate, but it gives a little bit of a mouth feel, like you get the tooth feel of the chocolate, and then because it's the shavings, it begins to melt, and so you get kind of the chocolate, the pure hit of chocolate, but then also the coffee ice cream. You guys know what I'm talking about?
Oh, I do.
I certainly do. Yeah. Mandarins, tangerines.
Yeah.
Perfect. Pastrami sandwich.
That's a pastrami Reuben is what that is.
Pastrami Reuben.
Mm-hmm.
So it's got some Russian dressing, some kraut, some Swiss, on a really nice rye, even a little pickle spear in the corner. Yeah. Berry smoothie. Berry smoothie.
And
it was at this
just
point.
hit day 5.
It was at this point, I think I sent you the berry smoothie. And then we talked a bit, like we talked a bit. We were talking the whole time. We started talking to each other. No, we were spending a lot of time together, and said, looking back through the previous pictures, about at the point that I sent you this, both of us are like, don't need the pastrami Reuben, don't need the charcuterie board, don't need the steak salad. Nope. It's the berry smoothie.
So to make that clear, there is a famous point in all kinds of fasting, including water fasting, where hunger disappears. And I had never reached it before. Mm-hmm. And I think it was day 5 here.
Day 5 was the toughest.
Day 5, I think you were off island and we were communicating.
Yes, I went off island because it's amazing how much of your day-to-day life is spent preparing and eating and cleaning up after food, and you're not at your best when you're this many days into extended dry fasting. And so I was trying to do work, and I did do some work. We both were doing a lot of work, but it was hard. And so I think I'm just going to go off island and
occupy yourself, because boredom is the enemy in all fasting.
Which is like I was trying to avoid that word because I don't believe in it.
Yeah.
And I told our children when we were young,
time.
like, yeah, it's like, there's always so much to do, but it was hard to stay on task. It was hard to stay focused because the brain is becoming focused on this one thing. And so, keeping yourself occupied, and like we both did a bunch of wood stacking, like we were both moving wheelbarrows of wood around and doing hikes and such. But the mental work was becoming harder and harder.
I was going to save this to the end, but it belongs right here.
Okay, go for it.
We did not say what it was that actually happened that caused the giggles at the beginning of the last podcast. It was involved in this process. So one of the things we learned when we study nutrition, that the brain, unlike the rest of the body, doesn't run on fat. It runs on sugar, it runs on glucose. And so famously, runners hit the wall, right? If a runner burns all the glycogen in their system, then suddenly it's like there's nothing in the tank, even though they may have fat on them that they could readily burn. The mind becomes cloudy and there's no readily accessible capacity.
Yep.
I've heard bikers refer to this as bonking. And I've experienced this actually multiple times, always in the same circumstance. If I would go out for an early mountain bike ride at the beginning of the season, I would forget that you need to eat abnormally beforehand in order to have
carb load,
the carb. And then I under budgeted on clothing. So it was very cold. I'm burning a lot of energy just to stay warm. And then, 13 miles into an 18-mile ride, suddenly it's like, oh, there's nothing in the tank, right? So anyway, we have this idea that the brain requires glucose, that it burns glucose. And what one does discover in this dry fast process is that there is some sort of impact on your capacity to function. I think our last podcast, though, points out a very interesting dichotomy. Many people reacted really well to the content of that podcast. Mm-hmm. And of course, the ad read went hilariously off the rails. So it's not like we couldn't think at all. We were thinking very well and speaking very well, but it was not a normal brain state.
Yep.
So anyway, that I believe is the ultimate reason why the giggles happened, and not having water was the reason that they could not be arrested.
Right. So round about day 5, I send you this picture of a berry smoothie, and then we want to show it again here. And pretty quickly we just get to water. Just pictures of water. Lemonade. I was like, I could go for some lemonade, but passion fruit smoothie. Passion fruit is one of my favorite things in the entire world. But still mostly water. More water.
Water.
Passion fruit smoothie again.
Yeah,
I sent it back to you. It's back. It's back.
A lot of water.
A waterfall. And this was maybe the day that we actually like dove into the sea. And both of us were just like, being inside felt stifling, and the weather was crazy. The weather was stormy and windy and wet, and just being outside, like just skin on the water on the skin. The
Something
cold
about
plunge.
the freshness of it
Yeah.
was
And then finally, this is the final one of these. This is you sending it to me with a couple of emojis, a water drop and an ice cube, 99%.
99% of the way there.
Yeah, we're 99% of the way there. So that relays the experience in part of having started, as you would expect, thinking about real, amazing, delicious food and going into a state of like, yes, still being interested in some nutrients, but most they had to be liquid, because by day 4.5, 5, I wasn't going to eat a pastrami sandwich.
Yeah.
That's not where you're going to start. Like, and so, I mean, let's talk a little bit actually about whether or not we were thirsty.
Good question.
Because, you think if you hear, oh, fasting, oh, you're going to be hungry, dry fasting, what? You're going to be impossibly thirsty. And as you have already said, you're going to get more and more hungry. You're going to get more and more thirsty. Well, you don't in either case, but one thing does get very bad and becomes increasingly impossible to ignore. And the only word that we have in English for it is not sufficient. It does not do justice to what it is, and it's dry mouth. So I referred earlier to ketosis mouth. You just get this sense of like, I can tell that I've got, that, my body is going through ketosis, and I don't have any way to clear it. And we did shower and cold plunge and go into the ocean, and we allowed ourselves to brush our teeth twice a day. And by day 4, the refreshing, even though, no swallowing, but, some would say that's cheating, but, no swallowing of the water. By day 4 or so, the freshness in your mouth that you would get from brushing your teeth was lasting, maybe 5 minutes. By day 5, it's like, while it's there, it's fresh. And then as soon as you're done, you go back to this sense of like a sponge that's been on a kitchen drain board without use for 4 days. There's just nothing there. And it's different from thirst.
Yeah.
Neither you nor I had the sense of like deep body thirst the way that both of us have experienced, but you more often than I have, because you did more of it in your youth before we were together, of extended backpacks and such. And this wasn't that, but it was a sense of like, I'm not sure if I can speak for a long time without interruption, because my mouth is going to dry out and I won't be able to enunciate. Which is why I was unwilling to read all 3 ad reads last week.
I want to say something that we haven't said yet.
Yeah.
That I think is important. One doesn't know exactly what to expect from a dry fast. You can read about it. But one of the things that's really, truly fascinating is that you don't stop peeing, which is one of the indications.
Right.
This is not, in fact, a death-defying stunt. This is actually something where your body is creating metabolic water, because where the hell else would it be coming from?
Yes.
So,
and if it does, like if you do stop peeing, you're in kidney meltdown and you need to stop.
So anyway, that is a very interesting experience. But just to be clear, we're not going to get into the weeds here, but 3, 4, 5 times a day, you pee. Like, I would say
continues.
The volume is not huge, but the number of times a day is actually not even abnormal as far as I'm concerned. But the question of whether or not, you are a little bit thirsty, or we were a little bit thirsty, but we were a lot uncomfortable toward the end, at the point that those pictures go from dreaming of luscious foods like a pastrami sandwich to exclusively liquids and obsessed with water. That's a pretty good measure of our mental state.
Yep.
But not out of that profound sense of thirst. Never did we get anywhere close to the discomfort that I've had in those, 4 or 5 circumstances where I under budgeted water in some case where I was hiking. which raises questions for me. I will say the place where our experience differs from that which we read about from the various places that we can read it is that in this book, you will hear, for example, that thirst is not an issue. Now, I suspect that this is a place where we, being rookies at this, probably did things that caused the elegant process to not unfold exactly as elegantly as it should have. And I would love to figure out whether that's true or whether it's not true. But I will say we did go through a very uncomfortable last 3 days. And I'm not convinced that that is inherent to the process. I'm sure there's a certain amount of discomfort, but it may be that there is a more elegant way to do it.
Yeah. So I guess maybe to wrap things up with the understanding that there's a lot more to say, and I think we're going to return to this as a topic again and again, and potentially in a more formal way. This is not medical advice. We're not advising this to our audience or anyone else, but I find it criminal, frankly, that this is another thing that's on the list of behaviors that humans can engage in. And instead of it being discussed, it is considered foolish and dangerous behavior.
Reckless, even.
Reckless, right? And again, most Americans are really unhealthy. And so this might, in fact, be reckless or foolish or dangerous for Americans who have, who are on drugs that they can't seem to get off of. I think, you would need to get to a state of stable enough health that you really could go for whatever amount of time you're trying to go without taking in anything, without taking any pills or ointments or elixirs or whatever at all. Right, and have been eating clean, by which I mean basically no alcohol, no sugar, maybe no grains, depending on whatever your particular known allergens are and more general American typical allergens are. Be eating as clean as possible before you start. But it feels like one of the things that just happened with the election was that there is a mandate, I think, to make America healthy again. Like that's part of what I feel like happened. And the public policy part of that is what we voted for. And we are seeing now, a crazy attack on Kennedy from all places, including a lot of people who would claim to be, courageous heterodox thinkers who can't actually think their way out of a paper bag, I think, because they're scared. They're scared that he might take what? All the insanity away? I don't know. But the public policy arm is one thing. What we as Americans, as humans, need to do first and always, no matter who is in office and no matter what kind of change is on the horizon, is take individual responsibility for our own health and our own lives. We have agency, and it is our bodies, our health with which to move forward in the world. And people are resistant. People are totally resistant to the kind of radical change that actually needs to happen at both the population level, the public policy level, and the individual level. So people have this fundamental belief in institutions that credentialed them, or that, the guys in lab coats show up and go like, I know that that's going to kill you. And you dig deep and you find out who's paying their bills, or how wrong they've been in the past, or how they have no predictive power whatsoever. And any of those things should make you go like, yeah, fool me once, shame on me, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me, right? So don't trust these people anymore. And we're not telling you trust us here. We're saying this is a thing. Intermittent dry fasting is definitely a thing that everyone is doing already if you are at all sleeping through the night, that you could be doing more of, and that will almost certainly bring to you some health benefits and resolve some things that you might think are actually not resolvable.
All right, I want to add a few things. One, I think it's even dangerous that we harbor within us this belief that we all think came from somewhere, that 3 days is the limit and you'll die if you don't have water for 3 days. Yeah. Imagine for a second that we face a disaster in which supply chains are broken, you're trapped somewhere you can't get out. Even just harboring that wrong idea in your head can cause you to make tragic errors in your planning. Knowing that you could go a week without food and water and not die is, you are entitled to that piece of knowledge. And the fact that you don't have that piece of knowledge is criminal, I believe.
To that point exactly. Do this so that you are in more control and can tamp down your panic response when it shows up. And this is exactly analogous to one of the values that I don't hear talked about very much of cold plunge.
Yep.
That I hated the idea of going into cold water, truly hated it. And I think there actually may be a sex difference in this as well. Women, I think, are more likely to be like, no way, no how. And when I was doing a lot of it with you and the boys last winter, I did it. I started doing it every day. I'm not sure I really saw any benefits, but I did it, and it is exhilarating afterwards. But it didn't feel like it was super necessary or brought me any particular health benefits. But what I know for sure it did was, if I were to inadvertently end up in very cold water at this point, I would not immediately panic, and that would make the difference probably between dying and not. And so similarly, if there is any chance, if you foresee any possibility that you might end up without water at some point, and frankly, if you're living such a sheltered life that that's not a possibility at all, okay. But if there's any chance that you might end up living without water for any period of time, it might be valuable to know for sure that you can do it. I can do this.
Yeah, you've got to know these things. And, and I would argue that there's a whole book to be written on all of the things that we don't know about ourselves.
Yeah.
When I used to lead trips out into the Scablands, I would encourage students to walk around at night without their headlamps on.
Yeah.
You discover that your eyes are capable of something that you will never figure out if you are constantly putting on a light, which then when you turn off the light causes you to think you're blind at night.
Right.
And
I'm helpless. Well, you are, because you were using technology to create aid.
You made your own problem.
Yeah.
And so anyway, knowing what we are capable of, parkour also reveals that the human body human mind are capable of things that we don't know are there. And I've heard the free run guys talking about tapping into this kind of inner monkey understanding of our center of mass. Anyway, so knowing what you're actually capable of as a human being is key. And this is one thing, knowing what you can endure, even just at a temperamental level, which brings me to another point. This was not easy. You and I experienced, and in fact, there was a point where each of us were about ready to bail out, and each of us talked the other off the ledge, and we're very glad that we went all the way through the 7 days of this
Day 5.
thing. Yeah, day 5.
Day 5 was tough.
Was pretty rough.
Yep.
But that discovery that you have this capability within you is liberating. Now, I will say the whole thing made me doubt something about the concept of willpower. I came to understand that willpower is probably at least 2 things, because this requires an extreme kind of willpower, to be sure. I find that I have that extreme kind of willpower, and then there's another kind of willpower that I don't seem to have, right? If I'm intermittent fasting, for example, and I get to 5 o'clock, it's very hard for me to limit what I eat after that. I eat voraciously. This is like that a little bit. The refeeding process forces the discipline into the week following, and we're still in that refeeding process. But that the willpower to do this is somehow distinct from the willpower to manage everything you eat or to micromanage it on a regular basis. We have not talked about the weight loss issue, and I will just have to warn people. The weight loss that comes along with this process is, in one way, staggering. You can just watch your weight fall on a daily basis. Some of that weight is water, and it comes back right away.
Yep.
So
careful refeeding will cause a fair amount of that weight to come back, but in a healthy way.
Right. And if it is in fact correct that the mechanism here involves the destruction of fat cells, then you should get some substantial, durable benefit with respect to weight loss. So I very much agree with the idea that you've got Make America Healthy Again is partly about cleaning up the goddamn food supply and the environment and getting people knowledgeable about what it is they're putting into their body and what implication it happens and all of that. There's public policy stuff to be done. There's no end of it. However, there's a whole personal level of it that is so profoundly important, and to be denied, to not even know that this tool exists on the map of possible things. You know, the number of people who are struggling with a weight issue who don't even realize that there is a natural, non-toxic technique that has been explored by numerous people, some of them very scientific about their approach to it, that has these profound predictable impacts, does not appear to be highly dangerous. And I'm not saying it isn't highly dangerous for you if you are distorted by modernity, dependent on pharmaceuticals, all of those things. But for a healthy enough person who's struggling with a weight issue or a chronic injury issue, this does not appear, as far as we can tell, to be highly dangerous. The fact that your doctor doesn't know that, and your doctor is more likely to prescribe some radical experiment called Ozempic rather than to tell you to experiment with such a thing.
And make sure you drink 8 glasses of water a day,
right?
You know, whatever the number is now. Like, where even did that come from?
Where did any of this come from?
Yeah.
Right? A lot of this stuff is like
from?
Some person at some point thought this sounded like common sense, and it became written in stone as if it was the result of some studious process.
You don't think you're a camel, do you?
Well, yeah, I think you're bound to have some of them processes. Yes, I do.
Yes.
And I guess the last thing, 2 more things. One, you hinted at it, but we don't know what would have happened if either one of us had tried this alone. I think it is highly likely that we each doing this alone would have ended up bailing out, because it is very difficult. And
Day 5.
Day 5 was tough to get through.
I did it 3 days, I've mentioned, alone. And for my personality, I really enjoyed doing it the first time alone.
Yep.
Second 3 day that we did together, it was fine. It was really hard to sleep. Like, we haven't actually talked about the sleep disruptions. But whatever, it could have been alone. It could have been together. I didn't really feel it. But this one, it was, not only was it important to have each other, I think, but it was, you'd think we've been together a long time. What could possibly, but it was bonding. Oh, honestly,
tremendously. It was, I wouldn't trade it for anything. It was a very profoundly galvanizing experience. Something about the shared struggle. Arguably, if you starve yourself of food and water long enough, you will die. It's possible that the body also registers, from its perspective, why did the food and water suddenly disappear, and is it ever coming back? This is presumably a trajectory that leads to death if long enough. It doesn't know that you've got, a stopwatch running and that the 7 days is the limit or something like that. So it's possible that causes this, the bonding experience. But whatever it was great.
It's like a dandelion response.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it created a tremendous feeling of camaraderie and all sorts of good stuff. So that's a very positive benefit that I didn't necessarily expect, but it was very clear. And then the last thing I'll say is, we haven't said it much in recent months, or maybe even years, but we used to say a lot on this podcast, welcome to complex systems. And what welcome to complex systems means, we would say it when some fool with a complicated mindset would screw up some complex system by attempting to, strong arm it into some new state, and then they would get their comeuppance because everything would break. We would say, well, welcome to complex systems. That's the mistake you made. It's always the mistake. But we rarely, if ever, have talked about the positive version of welcome to complex systems.
Good.
And I think this is exactly that case, where what you have is capacities built into you that you could go an entire lifetime and very easily never discover, which create an elegant process which gives you a ton of control over things like, for example, your weight, right? We are, again, still novices at this. But the idea that if you can build out your capacity, and I wouldn't recommend that anybody start with a week.
No.
Start with a day.
Yeah.
3 days is an accomplishment. But if what you did was you figured out how to, within the next year, build yourself up to the capacity that you can go back to whatever weight it is that you would like to stay at, and then use some periodic version of this to maintain that weight. So you know your weight goes above some number, it's time to revisit, right? That does a lot of things for you, right? Not only does it gives you a kind of control with no pharmaceuticals, etc., but it also gives you the capacity. Whoa, I just lost it. What was it?
I don't know. You're gaining control of your psychology and also your soma, and
it's going to come back to me, but it's not going to come back right away.
Okay.
But in any case, it's a very powerful process that I know. It builds the right incentive structure because no matter what else is true of the extended dry fast, it's not easy. So to the extent that you can alter your eating so you have to do it as infrequently as possible, you are better off, right? If on the tail end of this thing, your appreciation for food and your sense that, whoa, I don't exactly want to go back there right away, if that causes you to look at every morsel of food a bit differently and think more carefully about what it is and how much you enjoy it and how much you want to eat of it and all of that stuff, then the point is that does give you a kind of control that is exactly what you want. You want to cultivate the internal structure that causes you to eat correctly. Again, we're novices. Who knows how well that pans out, but you should at least know that you have this tool at your disposal. And if you don't, because you're too dependent on pharmaceuticals and things, you might ask yourself the question, well, how much, in a world that's as chaotic and unpredictable as ours, how much do I want to be dependent on these external inputs? And how much better off would I be if I could use these other tools at my disposal that, frankly, I want to see more of a demonstration of it, but the idea that this has benefits with respect to preventing and arresting cancers and things like that.
Well, the some of the research, the peer-reviewed scientific research that has been done, has specifically been looking at stem cell generation during chemo, and finds that dry fasting promotes stem cell generation specifically during chemo, that makes the ill effects of the chemo less and the positive effects, maybe this was a little bit less certain, better.
Yep. Yes, all of the above. And I couldn't be happier. I would love to get the discomfort day 5 through 7 under control. I would love to figure out what exactly that is and whether or not there really is a mechanism to deal with it. I wouldn't let it dissuade me from doing it, but it would certainly give me pause if there was no mechanism to control that. But I am so grateful to have the knowledge that I'm not as fragile as I'd been told I was.
That's right.
3 days is not the limit.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful for all of the other collateral benefits like bonding and all of that came from this. The very last thing I will say. It is, of course, perilous for us to discuss something like this with the public. We're trusting you. We're trusting you to understand what this is and what this isn't. This is effectively a report. In our book, we describe the laboratory of the self. We have engaged the laboratory of the self here, and we are reporting to you on what we found. We're not telling you we're experts, but we are telling you what happened to us as completely as we can tell you. And what I would suggest is that you think about, should you read this book with a grain of salt? It's actually kind of too technical for most people. There's elements of it that are too chemical, and they're a stretch, but should you do your own research and look into some of the communities of people who are utilizing this? Heather has one such community up on her screen.
Yeah. So Dry Fasting Club. This guy who runs this has put himself through, I think, hundreds of days of dry fasting and has a number of excellent descriptions of protocols and resources for during the fast itself and refeeding and everything. So this is another great resource.
Okay. And then one last thing I have to say that's just protective of us. I think it's completely legitimate, but nonetheless needs to be said out loud on the front end. Are there dangers here? There are. Life is dangerous. What I fear is going to happen is that somebody is going to hear about this and they are going to engage it recklessly, or maybe not even engage it recklessly. They're going to suffer from bad luck in conjunction with some responsible experiment. Maybe somebody will die. That is, of course, a terrible thing, and it is something we wish to avoid. But I would point out, if you invent a new technology and you put it onto the market, if people have burned to death in their Tesla, right? It's a terrifying thought.
Yep.
That is not the measure of whether or not it was a legitimate thing to bring to the market.
Yes.
Grow up. We do not restrict ourselves to discussing only things in which nobody might die. If I say, hey, skydiving is great, and you go skydiving and you die, that's not on me, right? You have to take responsibility for your life, and you have to recognize that, hey, you know what's really dangerous? Listening to the experts. I didn't make it that way. Heather didn't make it that way. We've been trying to warn you that there's a problem with the experts. So in lieu of the experts, what are you left with? You're left with a lot of people whose credibility you're going to have to evaluate for yourselves, including us. Yeah. And what we're telling you is a report of something factual. If we were lying, that would be one thing, but we're not lying. So This happened. You don't die at 3 days if you're us, apparently. You don't die at 7 days if you're us, apparently. What does that mean for you? We don't know, but be aware that for some people, you have access to a toolkit that nobody has told you about.
Beautiful. All right. I think we did it then.
I think so too.
All right. darkhorsepodcast.org has our upcoming schedule and such. Locals is where we'll be doing a Q&A in 15 minutes where we will be looking at the chat. So if people have more questions about this, we're happy to talk more just to our locals community. Please do join us there if you have the interest and wherewithal. Check out our sponsors this week, which I've already forgotten who they were. It was Crowdhealth and Brain FM and Timeline, I believe. And I published a letter that I received on natural selections this week from a new friend and acquaintance we haven't met yet, but I hope that we do, writing about her experience having been relieved, living in very blue Washington, as we do as well, Washington State, having been relieved by the results of this latest election, and having a friend who lives a little ways away from her, but also in very blue Washington, assume that she had exactly the same response to the election, which was, oh my God, this is hell, I have to leave the country. And this is a really extraordinary missive. I encourage people to go and check that out at Natural Selections. I also wrote, as an addendum to that, Natural Selections this week, when on day 6 of our, and I didn't say it in the piece, but it was day 6 of our dry fast that we went out on the water. And that morning, I drove very, very early on in the day, and the sun was rising behind me, and up ahead, suddenly, the giant yellow full moon appeared, and it was extraordinary. It brought tears to my eyes, and there had only been one time before in my life that I had been in a place where I could see both of those giant, light-giving entities in our sky be, setting and rising at the same time, 180 degrees opposite. And then that same evening, we were out on the water, and we were watching the sunset, and the moon came up to the east, and it was it's just extraordinary. So I also wrote about that.
Yeah, beautiful. I read it. I loved it. Just, you're on this beautiful little blue marble rolling between these two objects, and it would be that when the moon is full, it's 180 degrees, and it sets just as, or it rises just as the sun sets.
Always.
For reasons that are obvious in retrospect once you think about it.
Yeah, that's right. So check that out. Reminder that we're supported by you. We appreciate you subscribing, liking, sharing both our full episodes and our clips. Jen is doing a great job with the Dark Horse channels, whatever, on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok now. And although we got some stuff pulled down off TikTok.
Yeah, Jessica Rose. Am I right about that? Jessica Rose, the Jessica Rose episode was pulled down by TikTok?
Well, a clip.
Or a clip from it, yeah.
Yeah. But we've got active social media channels in all those places now. So we'll be back with a Q&A on Locals Only in a few minutes. And until we see you next time, be good to the ones you love, eat good food, unless you're dry fasting, and get outside.
And appreciate water. Be well, everyone.